Have you ever wondered why you keep falling for the wrong people? The ones who make you doubt yourself? The ones who feel distant, emotionally unavailable, or somehow just out of reach? You tell yourself you'll choose differently next time. You promise you've learned. But somehow you end up in the same story, just with a different face, a new voice, maybe a new city, but the same emotional script playing on repeat. It's frustrating, it's exhausting, and it starts to feel like something inside you is broken. Like love just doesn't work for you the way it works for others. But what if the problem isn't your taste? What if it's your programming? Freud believed that our romantic choices are not made consciously. We're not as free as we think we are. Our hearts don't simply choose what's best for us. More often, they reach for what feels familiar, even if what's familiar is deeply painful. He called it the repetition compulsion, a kind of psychological echo that draws us toward people who mirror unresolved conflicts from our past, not because we want to suffer, but because we're trying, without knowing it, to finally fix something that once hurt us. Think about it. That intoxicating feeling of being drawn to someone who is emotionally distant. Why does it feel so intense? Why does it feel like fate? Often, it's because that emotional distance mirrors something from your earliest relationships. Maybe a parent who was there, but not really present, someone whose love you had to earn. And now, without realizing it, you associate love with struggle, with uncertainty, with chasing after approval. So when someone comes along who offers love easily, safely, without emotional games, something in you pulls away. It feels off. It feels boring. It doesn't click. Not because there's no chemistry, but because there's no chaos. And for many of us, chaos has become the language of love. This is what Freud meant when he said we don't fall in love with people. We fall in love with emotional patterns, patterns that were etched into us long before we even understood what love meant. Our unconscious is full of unresolved desires, unmet needs, and forgotten wounds. And we're drawn to people who stir them up. It's not love, it's recognition. You're not attracted to their personality. You're attracted to the emotional experience they offer, the familiar feeling of chasing something that might never fully be yours. That's not a conscious decision. It's an emotional reflex, one that's rooted in your past. When Freud talked about love, he didn't paint a romantic picture. He described it as a mirror, one that reflects our deepest longings and fears. We don't just want to be loved. We want to be loved in a way that heals something in us. And so we gravitate toward people who, consciously or not, give us a chance to rewrite an old story. But that almost never works, because we're not rewriting, we're reliving. This is why you keep choosing the wrong people, not because you're messed up, not because you don't know better, but because a part of you is still searching for closure, for resolution, for that one moment where the emotionally distant person finally turns around and says, "You're enough." And everything that hurt back then suddenly makes sense. But here's the truth. That moment isn't coming. Not from them. No relationship in the present can heal the wounds of your past unless you become aware of them first. And that awareness doesn't start with finding someone new. It starts with asking hard questions about the people you've already chosen and what they reflect back to you. Why did you fall for them? What need were they filling? What part of you felt alive in their presence, and what part of you felt invisible? These questions aren't easy. They hurt, but they're the beginning of freedom. Because once you see the pattern, you're no longer trapped in it. You can stop mistaking intensity for intimacy. You can stop confusing anxiety with chemistry. You can stop thinking love has to feel like work. And most importantly, you can stop chasing people who make you feel like you're not enough. Freud believed that our unconscious drives so much more of our lives than we realize, and nowhere is that more obvious than in the way we love. But when you bring awareness to those drives, you regain control. You stop living your past on repeat. You stop loving in survival mode. And for the first time, you make space for something different, something stable, something safe, something that doesn't just feel familiar, but feels right. There's a strange kind of attraction that pulls you toward people who aren't good for you. You see the red flags. You even name them out loud. You feel the tension in your body, the anxiety, the confusion, and still, something inside you stays. You tell yourself you're being patient, open-minded, forgiving. But deep down, you know what's coming. You've seen this story before. Maybe with a different person, maybe in a different form. but the emotional blueprint is always the same. It's not because you're addicted to pain. It's not because you're broken. It's because attraction isn't always a choice. Sometimes it's a memory, one your body and nervous system remember even when your mind has forgotten. Freud believed that much of human behavior, especially in relationships, is not governed by conscious decisions. We like to think we're choosing our partners because of shared interests, values, or chemistry. But beneath the surface, something older is often at work, a compulsion to repeat, to recreate a dynamic from childhood that never felt resolved. This is what Freud called the repetition compulsion. You unconsciously seek out people who trigger old feelings in you not to suffer, but to repair. To go back into the emotional storm of the past and find a way to survive it this time. You don't just want love. You want redemption. You want a different ending. And so you fall for someone who reminds you, emotionally, not always consciously, of someone who once made you feel unseen, unloved, not enough. You don't do this on purpose. In fact, you might be drawn to the exact opposite personality, but the emotional experience is the same. Distance, inconsistency, uncertainty. You feel yourself chasing, earning, proving, hoping. That feeling, as painful as it is, feels familiar. It feels like home, even if home never felt safe. And here's where it gets really confusing. When someone comes into your life who offers calm, consistency, safety, it might not feel right. Not at first. You might say there's no spark or something's missing. But maybe what's missing isn't the spark. Maybe it's the drama, the anxiety, the emotional roller coaster you've learned to associate with love. We don't fall in love with people because they're good for us. We fall in love with people who activate something unresolved inside us. And when they do, our minds create a fantasy. If I can get this person to stay, to change, to finally love me the way I need, then maybe I'll prove that I was always worth loving. But the person in front of you isn't your past, and they can't fix it. They weren't there when the wound was made, and they won't be the one to heal it. That's your job now. This is the core of Freud's insight. We project. We take old emotions and old expectations and place them onto new people, as if they were actors in a play we've been trying to finish for years. And that projection is so strong, it blinds us. We don't see people for who they are. We see what we hope they'll become, or what we fear they'll repeat. And most of the time, they repeat it, not because they mean to, but because we chose them for that very reason, even if it was unconscious. So what can you do? You start by noticing, by slowing down. When you feel drawn to someone, ask yourself, what does this person represent emotionally? Not what they do for work or how they look, but what feeling do they bring up in you? Do you feel safe? Or do you feel like you're chasing something? Do you feel seen? Or do you feel like you have to earn their attention? These are the real questions, and the answers will reveal more than any dating profile ever could. Awareness is powerful. Once you see the pattern, you're no longer trapped in it. You can still feel the pull, but now you know what it is. It's your history echoing through your body. You don't have to follow it anymore. You can pause, breathe, and make a different choice. It will feel unfamiliar, maybe even wrong, because familiarity and health are not the same thing. What you're used to isn't always what you need. Learning to choose differently takes time. At first, it might feel like walking without a map, but every time you resist the urge to repeat the past, you build a new future. One where love isn't about fixing something broken. It's about sharing something whole. You're not broken because you fall for the wrong people. You're human. You were shaped by your early experiences, and those experiences created a template for love. But that template isn't permanent. You can update it. You can rewire the way you respond. You can teach your nervous system that calm doesn't mean boring, that kindness doesn't mean weakness, and that safety doesn't mean settling. And maybe, just maybe, you'll start to feel something you've never truly felt before in love: peace. There's a moment in many relationships where you know, deep down, that it's not going to work. Maybe they keep pulling away. Maybe they're inconsistent, distant, unavailable. And yet, you stay. Not because you're happy, not because you're blind, but because leaving feels unbearable. Because even the tiniest hope that they might come around feels more powerful than the pain they cause you. This is the emotional trap that so many people fall into, mistaking hunger for love. Freud believed that love often isn't just about who's in front of us, it's about what's unresolved inside of us. It's not always about connection. Sometimes it's about craving, about trying to fill a void that was created long before we knew what love was. Emotional hunger is not the same as love, but it can feel just as intense, sometimes even more. And that's where the confusion begins. If someone makes you feel anxious, desperate, obsessed, or incomplete without them, it's easy to interpret that as passion, as depth, as a sign that it's meant to be. But often what you're feeling isn't connection. It's survival mode, a part of your nervous system that got stuck years ago and is still searching for safety in the wrong places. Freud believed that the human psyche is driven by unprocessed needs from childhood. The child inside us never really disappears. It simply learns to wear adult clothes. And when those needs weren't met in the way we needed, emotional attention, affection, stability, they don't go away. They get buried, they go underground, and later in life they reappear, disguised as attraction. That's why it's so easy to fall for someone who triggers your deepest insecurities. You think you want their love, but what you actually want is something much older, to finally feel like you're enough, to win over someone who keeps slipping away, to prove once and for all that you are lovable. And so, without knowing it, you try to use this new person to resolve an ancient pain. Not consciously, not intentionally, but emotionally, deeply, unconsciously. You're asking them to rewrite your past. But they can't. No one can. Because love doesn't work like that. And especially not when it's built on hunger. Hunger distorts reality. It turns breadcrumbs into feasts. It makes us cling to the bare minimum and call it something. It keeps us chasing people who give us just enough attention to keep us hooked, but never enough to feel safe. It convinces us that suffering is proof of love, that the harder it is, the more real it must be. But real love doesn't starve you. Real love nourishes. It calms. It creates space to breathe, to grow, to rest. And yet, for many of us, that kind of love feels foreign, even boring, because it doesn't light up the old alarm bells we've learned to associate with intimacy. This is one of the most difficult things to accept. If your idea of love is rooted in emotional chaos, then peace will feel uncomfortable. If your nervous system is wired for instability, then someone stable may not feel attractive, at least not at first. It's not that you don't want healthy love, it's that your body doesn't know what to do with it. That's not your fault. But it is your responsibility to learn, to rewire, to tell your nervous system, we don't have to chase love anymore. We don't have to beg or suffer or wait in confusion. We can receive love now, without proving anything. But that requires something most people avoid: grief. Grieving the love you didn't get. Grieving the years you spent chasing people who reminded you, even subtly, of the ones who couldn't love you right the first time. Grieving the part of you that believed if you just tried harder, sacrificed more, waited longer, someone would finally choose you. Grief is not weakness, it's truth. It's the process of letting go of illusions. And once you let go, you start to see clearly. You start to recognize what's real and what's just a repetition. You begin to feel the difference between being wanted and being used, between being loved and being needed, between intensity and intimacy. Freud believed that healing isn't about eliminating desire, it's about making it conscious. When you bring your patterns into the light, you're no longer trapped by them. You can feel the hunger and still choose not to feed it in the old ways. You'll still feel this pull toward emotionally unavailable people sometimes. You might still be tempted by the chaos, the drama, the high, but now you know what it is, and you can pause, you can breathe, you can say, this isn't love, this is longing, this is my past asking to be seen, and you can respond not with desperation, but with compassion. You are not too much, you are not too broken. But you may have been taught that love means sacrifice, that love means proving yourself, that love is earned. It's not. Love is received when you are ready to believe you're worthy of it. You don't have to earn love anymore. You only have to heal the part of you that thought you did. There's something deeply confusing that happens when you finally meet someone who treats you well. They listen, they show up, they respect your boundaries, and suddenly, you feel nothing, or at least not what you're used to. No rush of adrenaline, no spark that keeps you up at night. Just quiet, stability, consistency. And that quiet, for many people, doesn't feel like safety. It feels like disconnection, like boredom, like something's missing. You tell yourself, I should be grateful for this. But deep down, you're wondering, why don't I feel more? This moment, the space between comfort and craving, is where many people walk away from the very thing they've been asking for. Not because it's not good, but because it doesn't match the emotional chaos they've mistaken for love. Freud wouldn't be surprised by this. He believed that the unconscious mind clings to what's familiar, not what's healthy. And if what's familiar is instability, hot and cold affection, emotional distance, needing to earn love, then safety can actually feel threatening, not because it is, but because your body doesn't recognize it. We're not just drawn to people because of who they are. We're drawn to how they make us feel. And even more, how those feelings line up with our earliest experiences of connection. If you grew up in an environment where love came with tension, where affection was unpredictable or conditional, then your nervous system adapted. It learned to live in a state of hypervigilance, to associate love with anxiety, to expect emotional inconsistency. So when someone comes along who doesn't play by those rules, someone who's just available, kind, reliable, it doesn't feel romantic. It feels off, like something's wrong. And your mind starts to look for flaws. You question their intentions. You convince yourself the chemistry just isn't there. But what if the chemistry you're used to is actually your trauma? That's a painful realization, but it's also liberating, because once you see it, you can start to separate attraction from pattern. You can start to ask, do I actually feel nothing, or am I just uncomfortable because I don't have to fight for this person's attention? Do I truly feel bored, or am I just unused to peace? One of the hardest things to unlearn is the idea that love needs to be intense to be real. That if it doesn't consume you, it must not be strong enough. But love isn't supposed to burn you alive. It's supposed to warm you, to steady you, to hold you when everything else feels chaotic. Intensity often comes from uncertainty, from not knowing where you stand with someone. And if you've been conditioned to confuse that uncertainty with desire, then real love will feel suspiciously easy, almost too easy. But it's not easy because it's lacking. It's easy because it's clean. There's no game to play, no role to perform. You just get to be yourself. And that might be the scariest thing of all. Freud believed that we're constantly negotiating between what we desire and what reality allows. He called this the conflict between the pleasure principle and the reality principle. The pleasure principle wants what feels good, what's familiar, what brings relief, even if it's ultimately harmful. The reality principle tries to step in, to guide us toward choices that are sustainable and truly nourishing. But that inner voice, the voice of reality, can be drowned out by the emotional noise of our past. So what do you do when healthy love feels unnatural? You sit with it. You breathe into it. You give yourself time to adjust. Because love is not just an emotion, it's a nervous system state. And if your system is used to being activated, overstimulated, anxious, then calm will feel foreign. But foreign doesn't mean wrong. It just means unfamiliar. The goal is not to eliminate attraction. It's to expand your capacity to be attracted to what's actually good for you. That takes time, and it takes rewiring, not with force, but with patience. By noticing your reactions without judgment, by staying curious when you want to run, by asking yourself, what would it feel like to choose peace? Even if it doesn't set off fireworks, because maybe real love doesn't explode, maybe it grows, quietly, steadily. And maybe that's not boring, and maybe that's the exact medicine your heart has always needed. You don't have to reject healthy love forever, but you do have to make space for it. That means grieving the part of you that believed love was something you had to earn. That means releasing the idea that drama equals depth, that chaos equals chemistry, that intensity equals intimacy. You were never meant to chase people just to feel worthy. You were never meant to beg for attention or mold yourself into someone else's ideal. You were meant to be loved in a way that feels like coming home, not like running in circles. And yes, it might take a while before that kind of love feels natural. But the more you allow it, the more you'll realize the thing that felt like nothing at first might actually be everything you've been missing. Sometimes the hardest truth to admit is that you're not actually in love with the person. You're in love with the emotional experience they offer. The mystery, the unpredictability, the chase. It feels like love because it's intense, because it's all-consuming. But is it really love? Or is it just a familiar emotional pattern playing out again? Freud believed that we don't just choose partners, we choose patterns, not consciously but emotionally. Deep down, we are drawn to people who help us reenact our earliest emotional blueprints, even if those blueprints were painful, even if they left us feeling unseen, unworthy, or forgotten. That's what makes this so tricky, because when you meet someone who replicates that emotional environment, who gives you just enough attention to stay hopeful but not enough to feel secure, your unconscious lights up. It's not telling you, this is right. It's telling you, this is familiar. And familiar always feels safe, even when it hurts. This is why some of the most intense relationships are also the most toxic. They activate something primal in you, a part of you that's still trying to get a different outcome from an old story. It's not about the person in front of you. It's about someone from long ago who didn't choose you. And now your unconscious is saying, let's try again. But this isn't healing, it's repetition. You're not rewriting the ending, you're reliving the pain. One of Freud's most important ideas was that we carry our unresolved emotional history into every new connection. He called this transference, the unconscious redirection of feelings from one person to another. In romantic relationships, that means we often fall in love not with who someone is, but with who they remind us of, or what they symbolize emotionally. So when you're drawn to someone who is emotionally unavailable, distant, critical, someone you have to chase, it might not be because of who they are. It might be because they help you feel something that's unresolved, a kind of emotional hunger you've carried for years. This is why logic doesn't help. You can write lists of red flags. You can talk yourself out of it. You can know intellectually that they're wrong for you, but your unconscious doesn't speak logic. It speaks emotion. And emotions don't follow reason. They follow memory. That's why you can meet someone kind, emotionally available, even deeply compatible, and still feel no attraction, because they don't match your pattern. They don't give you the feeling you've learned to associate with love. And here's the part that hurts. Sometimes it's not the person you miss. It's the pattern, the emotional high, the constant seeking, the illusion that if you could just do enough, say enough, be enough, you'd finally be chosen. That's not love. That's self-abandonment dressed up as romance. So what do? First, you have to stop blaming yourself. You are not weak for loving someone who couldn't love you back. You're not broken because you keep choosing the same kind of person. You're responding to emotional programming that was installed long before you had a say. But now you do have a say. Freud's solution wasn't to destroy the unconscious, it was to bring it into the light, to become aware of the forces shaping your choices so you could make different ones. And that starts with this simple question. What do I keep calling love that's actually a familiar wound? That question can change everything. Because once you see the pattern, you start to understand that the rush you feel, the butterflies, the obsession, the craving, isn't always a sign of love. Sometimes it's your body remembering. Sometimes it's your inner child hoping that this time someone will stay. But no one can heal that part of you except you. And when you realize that, something powerful happens. You stop chasing people who confuse you. You stop trying to earn love. You stop craving the emotional chaos that once felt like home. You begin to understand that real love feels different. It's not always dramatic. It's not a roller coaster. It doesn't keep you guessing. It doesn't make you prove your worth. It lets you rest. And yes, at first, that rest might feel unfamiliar, even wrong, because your nervous system is so used to being activated by the chase. But the more you choose peace over pattern, the more your body will learn a new definition of love. One that doesn't require you to shrink, to chase, or to suffer. You are not broken because you're drawn to intensity. You're human. You were wired for connection. You just learned to find it in places that couldn't hold you. But now you can learn something new. You can choose something new, not because it's easy, but because you're ready. There's a moment when everything becomes painfully clear. You finally see it. You recognize the pattern. You know exactly why you're drawn to certain people. You've traced the connection all the way back to your childhood, to your early wounds, to the emotional blueprint that shaped your idea of love. And still, you can't stop. You still feel that pull toward the same types of people. You still chase those tiny moments of validation. You still stay in relationships that you know aren't right. You've done the inner work. You've read the books, listened to the podcasts, maybe even sat in therapy, and yet nothing seems to change. This is one of the most frustrating realities of emotional healing. Awareness is not enough. Freud believed that understanding your unconscious motivations is the first step, but not the final one. The real transformation begins when you act against those patterns, when you make different choices, even if they feel completely unnatural at first. Because the unconscious doesn't care about your intellectual insights. It only knows what feels familiar. And what's familiar is what it clings to. This is why your nervous system might still crave intensity, even when you know it's harmful. Why you might reject healthy, stable love because it doesn't feel exciting. Why walking away from an unhealthy relationship doesn't always feel like freedom. Sometimes it feels like grief. Because what you're letting go of isn't just a person, it's a part of yourself, a part that hoped, maybe your whole life, that love would eventually feel like safety. And now you're facing the terrifying truth. No one else can give you that safety unless you give it to yourself first. Freud's idea of the ego, the conscious self, was not to be ruled by emotion or desire, but to mediate between what we want and what actually serves us. But here's the thing. The ego gets overwhelmed when your emotional history is loud, when old wounds scream louder than logic, when longing hijacks your better judgment. So what can you do? You start by getting honest about the space between what you know and what you do. You know you deserve better, but do you act like it? You know someone is wrong for you, but do you still text them back? You know peace is possible, but do you keep returning to chaos just because it feels more alive? This is not about guilt or shame. This is about choice. And choice starts with slowing down, with pausing long enough to notice when your body is trying to reenact the past. That racing heart, that knot in your stomach, that deep fear that if you don't respond right now, they'll leave. That's not love, that's your trauma talking. But here's the good news, the moment you can name it, you can start to redirect it. You don't have to silence the fear, you just have to stop obeying it. When you feel the urge to chase someone who's inconsistent, sit with it. Let the feeling pass through you without turning it into action. When you meet someone who's kind but doesn't create that emotional high, stay curious. Don't write them off just because they don't trigger your nervous system in the way you're used to. This is the real work, not intellectual understanding. Embodied change, learning how to feel differently in the presence of healthy love. And that takes time. Your body will resist it. Your mind will doubt it. You'll want to run back to what you know, not because it's better, but because it's easier. Familiarity always feels safer, even when it hurts. But the more you choose peace over patterns, the more that peace starts to feel like home. Freud often spoke of the tension between the id, our primitive impulses, and the superego, the internalized voice of judgment and control. The ego sits between them, trying to make sense of it all. And in the context of love, this is exactly what happens. Your desire pulls you one way, your shame pulls you another. And your conscious self has to step in and ask, what's actually true for me? Truth is quiet. It doesn't scream. It doesn't demand. It whispers. It says, this feels safe. This feels calm. This isn't dramatic, but it's real. Can you hear it? Or are you still chasing the noise? Eventually, the choice becomes clear. Do I want to keep feeling what's familiar? Or do I want to feel what's actually good for me? Because those two things are not the same. You may still be tempted. You may still feel the old pull. But with each conscious choice, that pull weakens. Not because your wounds disappear, but because you stop feeding them. You stop assigning your worth to people who can't hold it. You stop outsourcing your peace to someone else's approval. You stop calling chaos chemistry. And instead, you start choosing yourself. Not in a selfish way, but in a way that says, I'm done repeating this story. I'm done hurting myself in the name of love. I'm ready to write something new. After everything, after the heartbreak, the realizations, the patterns, the healing, you're left with one final question. Now what? Now that you understand why you've been drawn to the wrong people, now that you've uncovered the unconscious patterns driving your choices, now that you've stood face to face with your own emotional history, what do you do with it? Freud believed that true transformation doesn't happen in the mind alone. It happens in behavior, in experience, in the body. The work of healing doesn't end when you've named your wounds. It begins when you start living differently, even when your emotions beg you to go back to what's familiar. And this is where most people give up, because choosing differently isn't glamorous. It's not a sudden moment of clarity or a cinematic transformation. It's quiet, it's awkward, it's uncomfortable. It often feels like going against everything inside you, because in a way, you are. When you've been trained by experience, by memory, by trauma, to see love as something that must be earned or fought for, then choosing peace will feel like a loss, not a gain. When someone comes into your life who offers genuine presence, who meets you with calm, who doesn't trigger your insecurities, it won't set off fireworks, but it will plant something else: stillness, safety, a softness that might scare you at first. Because here's the truth most people don't talk about: healing is lonely sometimes. Not because you're alone, but because you're no longer bonding through wounds. You're no longer drawn to chaos. You stop texting the person who kept you confused. You stop chasing validation from people who always left you waiting. And in that space, that silence, you begin to hear yourself again. That voice, that small, quiet one, the one that says, I don't have to keep proving I'm lovable. I don't have to stay in pain to feel seen. I don't have to lose myself just to feel close to someone else. And when you hear that voice, really hear it, you realize you were never broken. You were simply reenacting what you thought love was. You were trying to win in the present what you lost in the past. You were loyal to an emotional script that never belonged to you. But now you get to write your own. That doesn't mean you won't feel tempted. You will. You'll meet people who light up those old circuits. The ones who trigger your longing, your hunger, your hope that maybe this time it will be different. And when you feel that, when your whole body leans in, pause and ask yourself, is this love or is this memory? Because when you can tell the difference, you become free. This is what Freud meant when he said that healing requires making the unconscious conscious. You don't get to erase your history. You don't get to avoid the lessons, but you do get to stop repeating the same pain, hoping it will end differently. And more than that, you get to start choosing people, not to fix you, not to fill a void, but to walk beside you as you grow. You stop seeking intensity and start seeking integrity. You stop chasing potential and start valuing presence. You stop looking for someone to complete you, because you've already started becoming whole on your own. That's what love becomes when you stop running old scripts. It's not a rescue, it's not a battle, it's not a high. It's a partnership, a rhythm, a space where you don't have to earn love, but where love deepens the more you show up as yourself. And maybe that's the final lesson. You are not hard to love, but you may have been taught to love in hard ways. Let that go. Let go of the story that says you must suffer to be seen. Let go of the belief that love is something to chase. Let go of the version of you that was built entirely to survive, and begin becoming the one who is finally ready to thrive. You'll still feel fear. You'll still carry echoes of old pain, but you'll meet them with new eyes, with a stronger heart, with a nervous system that no longer needs to be lit on fire to feel connection. And one day, when you meet someone who doesn't excite your wounds but speaks to your calm, you'll know. You'll feel it, not as a spark, but as a breath, as relief, as that quiet inner voice whispering, this time it's safe to stay.